How are they managing the data?
I mean, you'd have to ask them.
Hello and welcome to Outside the Fox, where we explore what's happening online and why it matters. My name's Ajay Patel.
And I'm Kim Horcher. AJ, I got a question for you.
Hit me.
When you use software, do you prefer to download the software to your computer or use it within a browser-based app?
I think I prefer the browser-based app.
That's interesting and pretty new, I think, in terms of how people use software.
So when you say browser-based app,
Yeah.
is that a tool like me looking for Canva or Figma
Mm-hmm.
versus what's the alternative?
I mean, you can truly download Canva as its
Like
own
a-
software to your
Okay.
desktop or whatever drive you want, or you can use it inside of an internet browser.
See, I didn't even notice that this shift was occurring.
It truly is. I mean, there's many apps that you can use either in the browser or downloaded separately as its own offline full suite device. You can use Photoshop as its own app or in the browser. Same for Canva, same for Figma. Several of them
Yeah.
are built to run both ways, but there's some slight differences. And to talk about it more, we have a special guest with us, and that is, of course, Steve Flavin. Hi, Steve.
Hey, everyone. It's good to be back.
So what is a browser-based app? Is that like maybe if I access my email client in a browser as opposed to downloading a separate software?
Yeah, I would say, even though we're seeing a trend, I would say in these kinds of apps becoming more widespread in the workplace, for instance. They've been around for a hot minute, and I think the one that a lot of us are familiar with is simply the Google Workspace suite. I was looking this up recently. Chromebooks have been a thing for, I think, since 2011, so almost 15 years now. This idea of a device that doesn't have a lot of onboard storage, but is always connected to the internet and is basically sort of a cloud-based hardware where you can access the browser-based apps. Most commonly, as you mentioned, Kim, there are a lot of desktop-based apps that are now offering a maybe slightly less feature-rich version of their app, like Adobe, for instance, that also runs in the browser. I myself use the Adobe Creative Suite, and Adobe Creative Cloud is quite handy when I don't have my main computer, which is where all of my Adobe apps are installed. If I need to do a touch-up in Photoshop or what have you. The web version of Photoshop is pretty full-featured. I can access most of my most commonly used features are available in that, which is really handy when you're in a pinch and you don't necessarily have the software installed.
I mentioned earlier that I never really recognized that this shift was happening. When would you say this shift started occurring, and maybe who was the catalyst for this?
Yeah, it's tricky to say. I've seen some online articles that have, drawn a comparison to Netflix, for instance, which used to be on physical media, right? Is like you would get DVDs in the mail, and then they kind of switched to a streaming model. And, I would say like mid to late 2000s, early 2010s is kind of this juncture where social media started taking off, and browser-based apps started becoming a little bit more fully featured. Our design team, for instance, uses Figma, and I believe is almost entirely browser-based. One thing that's really handy for that is like when they're reviewing design assets, and we're collecting feedback, you don't necessarily have to have the app installed in order to access it, to view it, and to leave notes and give feedback. It is quite handy because, to expect somebody to download something, to install it, to create an account is sometimes problematic. It takes time and resources. So having something that runs pretty smoothly in a browser can make things more accessible when you're collaborating with other teammates.
So would you say it's more of a convenience-based factor as to why businesses might prefer a browser-based app versus a downloaded software?
That is a good question. I would say there's convenience that's involved. There's also something to be said about being able to access it on any computer or any device. Mozilla, for instance, some of us are Mac users, some of us are Windows users. some of us do both. And so it's nice to have access to the same tools and apps, regardless of what platform that you happen to be using. I would say a big limitation with browser-based apps is the fact that you constantly need an internet connection. That's problematic. Like if you're on a flight, for instance, I don't know why in the year 2025, airplane Wi-Fi still sucks, but this is the reality that we live in.
True.
When I need to get stuff done on the airplane, it's like I've got to be able to work offline. In some ways, it's a nice way to focus, because if I'm not being distracted by my internet connection, I can just crank out that doc or a spreadsheet or what have you.
One big thing I love about kind of like the browser-based apps is I don't have to worry about the storage of things. So if for example, I love Canva and I don't have much experience with Figma, so I'll speak to Canva, where it's like, no matter how many, flyers I create, I don't have to worry about my space running out on my laptop. When I'm using a web-based app, I'm taking this storage off of me and now putting it into whatever, I don't know how they manage it on their end, but
Well, that's a good question, which is, are there privacy concerns? How are they managing the data?
yeah, I guess, Steve, do you know anything around that?
I mean, you'd have to ask them, or whatever terms of service that you agree to, for sure.
One thing I've noticed is, it's very easy to push out an update on a certain tool when you're going via the web browser route, versus if you have an app on your computer, then I have to, push something to the app store and then say, hey, I need you to update this. And you may not even know about the update unless you have like auto updates running.
A lot of people do.
So Steve, have you seen any like pros and cons to that, where if I need to push out an update, or, a company needs to push out an update, it's much easier to push it out via the web-based route versus the traditional desktop app?
I mean, that's a good point, where, I mean, you don't really even have to push it out. It just updates, right? It's like you access and it's already updated. It is a little bit of a pain, whether you're on a mobile device or a desktop device. It's like you're either you have the auto update, or I know a lot of people that are reluctant to turn on auto updates because of compatibility issues. Particularly like when I'm working on a big project in Premiere, for instance, I'm reluctant to download the latest version of Premiere because it might mess up my project. It probably won't, but there's a non-zero chance that it will.
Are browsers optimizing for increased usage of browser-based apps?
That is a very good question. I don't know that I can accurately answer that. I do know that browsers still, they consume kind of a lot of your resources. They use a lot of RAM on your computer, and they can potentially slow other things down. And like even today, you would think that over the years that would have gotten better. But I mean, the fact is, when you're browsing the internet, it consumes a massive amount of your computer's resources.
As companies start rolling out, whether they have a separate app to their identity or tool that they want to roll out to users, and maybe they're focusing on web-based versus desktop-based, what do you feel like is at risk as companies may switch over more towards the web-based side of things?
Something that I think is a benefit. I know that's not what you're asking, but I think something that I've encountered at other, from various companies that I've worked for, some of which, are, I wouldn't say pre-internet, but it's like in the early internet days, where, for example, in another life, I was a designer, and I worked for a company where we had a certain version of the Adobe Creative Suite that we used. And even though there was a newer version that was out there, we as a company decided that we're only using this version because of compatibility reasons. That if we were to upgrade to the next version, it would break the compatibility of certain, third-party tools that we were using and certain workflows that we had. That isn't necessarily the case with Mozilla. We're encouraged to keep everything up to date. And I think partly because, like, as we're developing products like Firefox, we want to make sure that they're, functional on, all of the latest software.
In a previous role that I had at a retail company, we had an app for the store as well. But the issue is this app would take up so much space on your phone, and it would continuously crash, and the amount of foot traffic was probably like a fraction of what was going on to just like a web-based platform of the same retailer.
I don't want to fill up my phone with all of these
And then it keeps
different things that take
crashing.
up space.
Right. And then at the end of the day, it just comes to your experience, right? I think I'm giving you a better experience by giving you the app because it's like, hey, you have this one
What
place
if
to
it's
go
not that
to.
important to me?
Exactly,
You know?
right? So I can easily get you to now just be foot traffic on the web-based platform that is operating much smoother. I'm spending much less dollar on headcount, engineering count on maintaining this thing. So what, like on this topic, I definitely see that this transition has been happening on like a corporate level. And I didn't realize that it was just happening with some of these tools that I was using. I realized that now that when was the last time I downloaded something outside of, some of the Adobe tools?
Sometimes they make it so it's really hard to use the browser-based version of something.
I wonder if it has anything to do with like the tracking side of things. Like obviously we talk about data a lot of this, and if I'm web-based, then I have to adhere to the country's policies to data collection. But if I'm on an app, I wonder. Kind of Steve was mentioning this earlier with the terms and conditions that you agree to. Is it just like a whole different ball game?
That is certainly something to consider.
No, that's a very good point. And I think that's why a lot of companies try to encourage you to use the app because they have a little bit more control over what you agree to. If you don't agree to the terms of service, you don't use the app. Whereas, if you're using the website, to some extent, you're limited to what's technically legally allowed, in whatever region that you're browsing the web.
Well, I certainly see your point when you speak of mobile apps, because on mobile devices, space is at a premium, Sometimes the end of my phone's life is when it's too full.
Yeah.
I can't get rid of anything.
I hear you completely. Just now, I think I'm running out of like Google Space, and
in your
I'm
Drive?
already paying for the Apple extra terabytes, and now it's like, dang, I have to pay for this now. And I understand, right? Like the amount of, it's almost like you go into someone's house and they're a hoarder and they have a bunch of stuff, and it's like that's what's happening on the data side of things. The number of files I have on my computer, whether it's pictures, videos, and these are large files as the quality has gone up. And so, yes, it has just been a constant headache for me. Of just like, okay, I thought I was getting to a point of having a smaller laptop, a smaller Xbox, and everything's getting smaller and smoother. But at the same time, I still have to store this somewhere.
Well, I mean, in the ideal sense, if we were to use browser-based apps for the replacement to all kinds of downloaded software, would that mean that our hardware would be allowed to be lighter, smaller, less powerful, and still get similar, not the same functionality, like usable functionality?
Theoretically, I think that could be the case. I think in some ways we're already moving in that direction where a lot of AI tools, for instance, are operated on servers outside of the device that they're using. There is, for better or worse, I would say probably worse. There's an environmental cost to that that has yet to be like really meaningfully addressed. In a world where that fidelity is either non-existent or negligible, you wouldn't need as powerful of a device, but I don't know actually if that's practical, at least for the foreseeable future.
I mean, right now I would say no. AI uses so much
The
water
energy plants, yeah.
To just, you ask it a dumb question and you've wasted so much water. That's an important thing to consider as we kind of transfer where our computing power is coming from.
Yeah, I guess on the topic of AI and, I guess where web apps are going, or, I guess thinking of the browser as an operating system of sorts, right? I think that's essentially sort of what we're talking about is a destination, as a place where, we can access all of these tools. It is kind of interesting in thinking philosophically about the future of the browser, in general. What we're doing with Firefox now is incorporating some AI features like the sidebar. It's not in a separate tab, so you're able to sort of multitask.
Well, that is a lot to think about. Steve, did you have any last comments for us?
Well, I don't have any last comments, but I think you might have some news.
I do. So everyone here is aware. So for our listeners, this is actually my last episode. I am moving to Texas, and I am going to start a family. Yeah, it's look how senti. Could we actually start the senti music at this point? So I am actually moving back to Texas, where I originally moved from when I first came to California about 3 years ago. I wanted to firstly thank the viewers, the listeners, Kim, of course, Steve, of course, everyone behind the camera. Today, I was telling you earlier where it's like I was ironing my shirt and thought about, dang, we talked to the CEO of Firefox, you know? And I remember leaving that and my armpits were sweating, and it's like, damn, that was pretty cool, you know? So definitely a lot of good memories here, and I wanted to thank you all again one more time.
Well, I'm happy for what's to come in your life, but I can't say that I won't miss you, and I selfishly would prefer to have you here because you have become my partner in this, and
Thank
I feel
you.
like we've become friends, and it's... What are we gonna do?
Well, luckily, next episode, you will have Steve joining you right in this chair.
We're gonna miss you, AJ. It's been a wild time. 36 episodes. Cannot believe it's already been a year, but here we are, and you contributed a lot, so thank you so much.
So then my last question for the audience. Would you rather have an AI that lives in your browser or you download to your desktop? Let us know in the comments.
All right, everyone. Subscribe to the channel and be sure to download Firefox because you know it's the best. I'll see you next time.
Dang.